In a geopolitical showdown where optics often outweigh reality, the narrative of maximum pressure appears to be crumbling under the weight of its own propaganda. As the Trump administration broadcasts a message of absolute maritime superiority and imminent victory, a vastly different story is unfolding on the high seas and at the negotiating table. The latest developments suggest that despite the tough rhetoric, the administration has effectively blinked first, moving toward surrender that grants Iran nearly everything it desires while attempting to mask the retreat as a masterclass in diplomacy. The tension centers on the strategic Strait of Hormuz, where U.S. Central Command CENTCOM, led by Admiral Brad Cooper, recently announced a fully implemented blockade. According to official statements, U.S. forces have successfully halted all economic trade entering or exiting Iran by sea, asserting total control over the region. However, independent maritime data paints a contradictory and humiliating picture for Washington. While CENTCOM claims mission accomplished, commercial trackers have identified numerous Iranian-linked vessels, including blacklisted supertankers capable of carrying millions of barrels of crude oil, moving freely through the blockade. These ships are not even attempting to hide. Many are operating with their signaling systems fully active, effectively mocking the U.S. presence and signaling that the superiority claimed by the Pentagon is little more than a paper tiger. Domestically, the administration continues to push a narrative of Iranian desperation. Since February, Donald Trump has repeatedly claimed that Tehran wants to make a deal badly, a sentiment echoed by J.D. Vance, who recently pitched a grand bargain intended to integrate Iran into the world economy in exchange for nuclear concessions. This optimistic framing, however, is being met with open derision from Iranian officials and social media accounts. In a display of psychological warfare, Iranian influencers have taken to mocking the U.S. leadership with memes, including cartoons of aircraft carriers being chased off by Houthi rebels. The mockery has even extended to personal attacks on the First Family, signaling that Tehran feels emboldened rather than intimidated. A particularly glaring crack in the U.S. strategy is the movement of the USS George H.W. Bush aircraft carrier group. Despite claims of maritime dominance, the pride of the U.S. Navy is reportedly being rerouted all the way around Africa to avoid the Red Sea. This detour, prompted by the threat of Iranian-backed Houthi proxies, sends a loud message to the global shipping industry. If the world's most powerful military is too afraid to sail its flagship through contested waters, the claim of maritime superiority is hollow. On the diplomatic front, the gap between the two nations is widening. Professor Morandi, a key figure in the Iranian negotiating circle, has clarified that Iran will never surrender its sovereignty or its right to peaceful nuclear enrichment. According to Morandi, the U.S. delegation, led by Vance, was not negotiating in the interests of the American people, but was instead prioritizing the agenda of the Israeli government. He highlighted a fundamental failure in the U.S. approach. Washington entered the conflict demanding unconditional surrender, only to be forced to revise its position repeatedly as the war progressed. While the U.S. rejected an initial 10-point framework, it eventually succumbed to discussing a 15-point peace plan that Iran ultimately dismissed as unacceptable. The administration's attempt to create diplomatic theater in Washington has also faced criticism. A recent trilateral meeting between the U.S., Israel, and the Lebanese government was touted as a historic milestone toward a ceasefire. However, analysts point out that the Lebanese government is not the core player in the conflict. The real power lies with Hezbollah, who were notably absent from the table. Without their participation, the talks are viewed as a facade, intended to create the illusion of progress, while the underlying conflict remains unresolved. Ultimately, the current trajectory suggests a deal that is significantly weaker than previous international agreements. While the Obama-era JCPOA restricted Iranian enrichment entirely, the current administration is reportedly bartering for a 20-year window, while Iran is only willing to concede 5. This stark difference underscores the speaker's argument. The grand bargain being promised is, in reality, a pathetic surrender disguised as a victory, leaving the United States in its weakest geopolitical position in decades.